I'm going to ask you because you know.
Let me do it.
No.
I want to do it.
Welcome back
I wanna do
to
it.
Energy
Why do you always
Nerd
get to
Show.
do it?
Do we have a guest today? Do we have a guest today?
Yeah, the guest is us.
Oh no, what's going to happen?
We're going to pick some of the highlights of past nerd shows. This is the ghost of nerd shows past. So we have a theme, which is buildings. Our nerd show audience is definitely interested in buildings and making buildings more efficient and less emissions. And we got to electrify everything. And we had a whole bunch of really good nerd show guests talking about different aspects of building decarbonization.
Right. Buildings are a big part of the equation. So we got a lot of experts. And we're going to revisit them.
Are they going to talk about big buildings?
Big buildings?
Or little buildings?
Well, if they're little, they better talk about a lot of buildings.
There's so many buildings.
Yeah.
So many buildings. It's going to be a lot of trouble. It's going to be a lot of trouble. How are we going to pick just a few to put on the show?
Oh, lots of stuff in buildings.
Yeah, so we had Christoph Reinhardt from MIT Building Design Lab.
Manuel Esquivel, who was with BPDA in Boston and has moved on.
Sue Reed.
We've known her since her CLF days.
Energy advocacy and electrifying her house.
One awesome synapser, Philip Eash-Gates. Mary Wembui.
Mary.
And then we're going way, way back to ancient history. The first episode that we ever did, we're going to revisit Michelle Appigian.
Wait, was that really the first episode?
What?
No, Cutler Cleveland was the first episode.
Way back to one of the first.
Yeah, it was a live on site.
The first live on site. How about that?
So we got to use Kale's drones. Man, those drones were flying over Cambridge. That was amazing, Kale.
Beautiful stuff. So what did we learn?
Oh, buildings are super important. They're like one of the most important aspects of energy transformation and dealing with our climate change impacts. And new buildings are kind of relatively easy compared to like retrofitting all the existing buildings. And I thought Tito teed that up really well.
We have about 600,000 gigatons of carbon left as a human society. And we can use that up to make the global economy carbon neutral. That's kind of the moment where we are at right now if we want to keep global temperature rise between 1.5 and 2 degrees C. So this kind of gives us a budget, and I think this is a good way to think about it. And then since in the building sector we are responsible for 40% of this, we can basically give us this as our budget. So let's say we have 300,000 gigatons of carbon left, and then 30 years, and we have to make the whole building stock in the whole world carbon neutral. And when you look at it that way, there's another, I think, interesting statistic without boring people, that in the next 30 years, we're going to double the built environment worldwide. So we're going to build as many buildings, floor plan area-wise, in the next 30 years as we've built in the last 5,000 years. Which is a scary thought. So when you take all of that together, it's nearly overpowering. So we have to say, okay, there are two things that we have to do. We have to dramatically increase the renovation rate in the world. And if you look at a lot of the US stimulus plan or now the Inflation Act, basically put a lot of money on the table to help homeowners do that. So part of our lab, what we are doing is we've been working with 20 cities around the globe and helping them think through how to do that.
Our friend Tito is working on some really interesting stuff.
Well, one thing it is put the whole thing in context about how many buildings we have to, kind of the role of buildings in an overall global decarbonization strategy. Bruce, you're always talking about Burning Man.
Don't imitate Tito's accent. Is that...
Wait, that was more Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I don't know what that was.
Because this building thing is so multi-dimensional, engineering, economics, building policy, politics, technical work, talking to people. So you really need some really, kind of high-powered nerd in the middle of everything, coordinating it in order to get stuff done over the long term. So you need a plan.
Right. And it should not be an elected official because those people last for, 4, 6, 8 years. And, this stuff takes a lot of time, and the continuity is really important because if that person leaves, sometimes the program drops off for a while and it's not cool. Mm-hmm. And what about Manuel Esquivel? It's been a little while since he was in Boston.
He kind of put things in perspective in terms of the overall goals of what we have to achieve and how the near term fits in with the long term, i.e. we got to really get moving fast now, or even put our time machine back and get moving faster than we did. And there's something for everyone to do in terms of their their work and kind of professional lives and that kind of thing, as well as in your own lives and your own choices?
I have a lot of friends who are starting to buy houses now. And when I say you're doing renovations in your house and you understand it's not this ephemeral concept that by 2050, we shouldn't be having any fossil fuels. No, by 2025, we're projecting no new sales of fossil fuel boilers. So as a consumer, what that means is if I'm thinking of renovating my house or doing any types of retrofits, especially the closer I am to 2025, I should not be installing any more fossil fuel boilers. And so I think the conversation, when I have this conversation with my friends, it's really going to change. And they're maybe going to be like, maybe I should be asking the questions, how can I place myself for that future, for that reality in 2025 today, as opposed to, well, maybe I need to start thinking about it in 2040 because it's by 2050 that we need to be achieving carbon neutrality. No, it's really now, especially for new items. The things that are going to be phased out later on are more the retrofits and the existing construction. But anything new is going to be the low-hanging fruit. So I think it's very important that we start having these conversations, even among friends and families, with these types of statistics and internalizing these projections, this future.
And so just setting the 2050 goal isn't enough. You got to get there incrementally and you got to have a plan.
Things turn over slowly. So, if you're investing in a thing or building a thing and it lasts for 20 or 30 or 40 years, then if it's going to affect, carbon emissions in a meaningful time frame, you have to kind of start now. Remember that time when Sue Reed was on the show?
Oh my gosh. Sue Reed, a true energy professional, did all that work on her house.
She made it seem easy, all those heat pumps. And she had such a upbeat, positive attitude. And and she loved her contractors.
Well, okay. Yeah, she made it look easy, but I'm still exhausted just thinking about it because I know it's not that easy for everyone. And that's part of the problem.
And then all of the other elements of energy consumption that were tied to the previous principal source of natural gas. I really was motivated to get off of natural gas. I had previously converted a gas dryer to electric, anticipating when the old dryer died, anticipating that at some point I was going to make this leap. So that was already done, but it meant getting a new induction range for induction cooking, a new electric hot water heater, and while all of this work was being done, finally getting a level 2 charger for vehicle charging at home. And so undertook all of this at once, planned out through 2019 and was intended to launch in early 2020. But you can imagine coincided exactly with lockdown and the pandemic. We had some then new wrinkles to work through. So I feel incredibly grateful. The whole project did come together in 2020. And now, and I'm delighted to talk about this, I'll just a placeholder for now. Now I've been able to observe through a couple winters, and a couple summers, including, incredible heat waves this summer, the performance of this house, the livability of it is so much better than it was before. Never had central cooling before. And, for very little energy consumption, very little cost, now have central cooling that certainly, especially the elderly dog of the house, who's 15 and a half years old and a built-in fur coat, especially appreciates. But I have to say, working from home, certainly it's appreciated here too.
But people who want to be inspired and learn a bunch about how to electrify, they ought to talk to Sue.
That's right. She's got that classic old house, and JP, lots of housing stock in Boston and other parts of the country and the world are, more than 50 years old, and they come with special challenges. So yeah, Sue,
and now she's done it.
I know, and it's great. And she's warm and cozy and spending a lot less on energy probably.
And she's also thinking globally. So Sue has a lot to say about electrifying, decarbonizing residential housing. But then what about all those commercial buildings?
For that, you would really want to ask Philip Eash-Gates.
What you're seeing here is a plot that we did towards the beginning of the project to try and understand where the emissions are coming from. So what you see here is a figure with about 1,600 little bars, and each bar represents a building. And on the vertical axis, we have the emissions intensity in kilograms of CO2 per square foot per year. So that tells you how intensive the energy use and therefore emissions in the building are. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the floor area of the buildings. If you think of each building as a rectangle, the height of it is how intensive it is in terms of emissions, and the width of it is its floor area. So the actual area of that rectangle is its total emissions. And then what I've done is I have grouped them together by the type of building. So we've developed 13 different typologies that are relevant to Boston buildings. And you see all of these bars organized and color-coded by the different type of building. What this shows us is that different types of buildings tend to have different emissions intensity profiles. And within the various groups of buildings, there are some buildings that perform really well, that have pretty low emissions intensities. And there are some buildings that have really high emissions intensities. And this policy is an opportunity to drive down the emissions across the entire profile, and starting with the buildings that are the poorest performing, that have the most emissions over time. So this plot that we did helps us to understand where the emissions come from, what are the primary sources of emissions throughout Boston, and where the city should be focusing its efforts.
Man, Philip's been doing a lot of good work for the city of Boston, huh?
City of Boston, a little bit in the city of Cambridge. I think we're...
City of Boston, global leader on building standards.
And I think Philip has done a really great job at distilling the quantitative pieces and how those things affect people.
Good thing we had Mary Wambuyi on the show. She's really inspirational in terms of having a constructive attitude and approach. You know, people with different goals really ought to listen to each other and have a little more empathy, perhaps, for others' positions.
In Massachusetts, we have like 2 million existing homes. Part of reducing GHG emissions has to come from those buildings. But at the same time, we have serious affordable housing crisis. And as it is, building 1 unit of affordable housing or retrofitting 1 unit of affordable housing is pretty expensive in Massachusetts. And any additional building technology or anything that has to do with decarbonization or electrification is definitely going to impact that cost. So we seem to have competing objectives. I don't see them as competing, and I'm hoping the housing folks and the climate folks would begin to see these things as, there's no competition really. We are all heading towards the same direction, and we can reduce homelessness and at the same time reduce our carbon emissions.
Mary is one of those people who really brings people together, and she can see things from different people's perspectives, and seems like she really can pinpoint the issues. Yeah, she gets people talking, and she understands the landscape and the technical side, which is a great combination.
So, Jeannie, remember that time we actually visited a big building?
The largest passive house in Massachusetts at the time it was built. Yes, I remember.
Yeah, like 100 units.
I thought you were going to say 100 years ago. It feels like it because it was pre-pandemic.
I think it was moderate low-income housing in Cambridge.
The Finch.
The Finch building.
That was great.
We're standing here with Michelle Eash-Gates, who's going to tell us about this awesome building behind us.
So this is called Finch Cambridge, and it will be 98 units of affordable housing in the largest passive house certified building in the state of Massachusetts. The passive house building standard is the most energy efficient building performance standard in the world. It focuses intentionally on a carbon footprint of a building, looking at how to radically reduce the load of the building so that it has as low operational energy as possible. And the way it does that is by basically creating a thermos so that the thermal envelope is also fully airtight and does the vast majority of the work that our heating and cooling systems are used to doing in our mechanically inclined buildings these days. So if we put our energy and our intensity into the building envelope with continuous airtightness and thermal continuity and attention to all the transitions and all those openings to maintain all that continuity, then we can have a much, much smaller heating and cooling system because we're basically holding temperature no matter what's going on outside the building.
I especially love hearing that badass Michelle Eash-Gates explain all of the features, all of the design elements of making that place, that big, wonderful multi-unit place that can stay warm. If the power was out, it would stay warm for a week, even if it was below freezing. I mean, who can do that?
Wow, Jeannie, we made a lot of Nerd Show episodes.
And a lot about buildings. Buildings are important.
Buildings are super important.
Yeah, seriously, I think it's great. And I hope that people who are newer to the show will go back and peruse the episodes.
Everyone should watch all the episodes.
Well, I'll just make one little...
Twice.
Yeah, they should. And I'll make one little shout out. There's a thing called the Earthshot Prize. And weirdly enough, I am a nominator for the 2023. And I plan to go through our episodes and pick a few things that are, I think, should be eligible for nomination. I mean, that's just one source. If you're watching this before January 31st of 2023 and you want to just send me your ideas, that works too. But we've talked to some really creative, generative people, and it's been so much fun. If they win, they get 1 million British pounds, and that's not the half of it. You get lots of business support and you get lots of coverage. They're really elevating these environmental ideas and the people behind them to high star status.
People who watch these nerd shows, in fact, anyone who watched this episode to this point is definitely a Nerd Show fan and should tell us what they want to see on the Nerd Show in the future about, guests or topics. Let us know. I think the website has a email link to give us your ideas about, what do you want to hear on the Nerd Show?
Thanks all. See you soon.
So long, nerds.